So I'm out here at one of my new favorite spots to do some testing with my trusty TF2. Okay, you can see the nice hillside over there. I brought this out today to test how much the sway bar makes a difference. You can see the sway bar on the back of this chassis that I put in there, and I want to know how much of a difference does it make, where does it make the difference, and is it better to have the sway bar or not have the sway bar? So let's cut over onto the hills, set up some lines, and see how it does with the sway bar, and then I'm going to disconnect it and we'll run the exact same lines without the sway bar, and hopefully somewhere in the video footage we'll be able to see a difference in how this little guy works on the trail. Okay, so we've hit a few different lines now with the sway bar attached. Some of them are a little hairy, some of them actually were easier than I thought they might be. Overall, I really like the way the truck handles with the sway bar, but we got to disconnect the sway bar, run those same lines again. I marked them. Some of them you saw the cones, some of the cones didn't get put up until after that shot was taken. But I marked those lines so I can go back and hit them again without the sway bar. So we're going to buzz over to the park bench that is way back down over there where we started. Oh, almost fell over. And we're going to disconnect the sway bar. I'm going to keep it in the truck. I'm just going to zip tie the link, disconnect the links from the axles, zip tie them to the frame so that the weight on the truck doesn't really change at all. The only difference is going to be no sway bar attached on there. And then we'll hit those lines and we'll see what it does. Okay, we're back at the bench. I have completed, as you can see, disconnecting the sway bar. It is no longer connected to the axle at all. So now we're running no sway bar. It's just zip tied onto the frame where it's up out of the way. So we don't change the weight at all. It is pretty warm out. I was going to do a quick little time lapse of actually, taking those off and making a neat little video, but the camera is already kind of warm and I want to make sure I get all the shot in on the lines on the trail. So I'm going to stop talking right now and we're going to get right back out there and run those lines over again. And I just noticed that I'm watching me on the screen and not the camera, so it looks like I'm looking that way the whole time. I am sorry about that. Back to the trail. Well, that seemed pretty inconclusive from a driver's perspective. I mean, the truck did seem to weight transfer a little bit faster and a little bit more with the sway bar disconnected, but the lines that I set up, it made them. So since it made it with and without the sway bar, clearly those lines were not appropriate for determining better or worse. Hopefully the footage will show a little something between the two. I'll have to look at it when I get back in the studio and compare A, B for each line and see if there was things that made it easier. But I mean, the truck did work both ways without issue. So I don't really know what to say there. I mean, the more top heavy your truck is, or the more torque twist it has, the more likely a sway bar is going to help. And like I said, I mean, from a driver's perspective, it definitely seemed like it weight transferred a little bit faster. The second line, it did roll over on that line the first time I attempted it. So that was, but that may have been driver error. I was coming through that a little bit quick, I guess. I mean, I don't know, I'll have to compare it in the studio. But ultimately, I mean, this really wasn't conclusive as far as dead set. It could make a line without it, or it couldn't make a line without it compared to with it. So yeah, that's what it is. We'll get back to the studio and see if we can determine a difference in the video and do a recap after the editing. All right, thanks again, and I'll be back in a flash.
And we're back. We're in the studio here to do a recap on the sway bar versus no sway bar in this truck. It is a day later by the time I actually got a chance to work on doing the video and recap, review all the footage that I took. And after looking at all the footage, I am confident in saying that this truck definitely works better with the sway bar on it than it does without the sway bar. Like I mentioned just a few seconds ago, I was able to hit all the different lines that I set up with and without the sway bar. But the way the truck handled and drove was, it was different. It had a different driver feel to it. And the stability just wasn't there with the sway bar. The truck felt more stable with it from the driver's perspective, but I wasn't able to see in real time some of the stuff that I noticed in the video. Obviously, I took a good look at what happened with line number 2 without the sway bar, where the truck rolled over, to see if it was something that maybe it was a driver error, maybe I took it too fast, maybe I drove too high up in comparison with where I drove the first time with the sway bar. And I don't think that was the case. I think what happened is I drove it, looking at the two videos side by side, I think I drove it at a very similar speed as I did with the sway bar. But the weight transfer as it came over that angled little hump, the weight transfer without the sway bar allowed the body to shift real quick. And that weight transfer just took the truck right on over, let everything go with it. And that's what rolled it over. However, not having the sway bar on there, when I took it the second time, a little bit slower and a little bit more methodical, the weight transfer didn't happen as quick, and I was able to still get through there without clipping that cone. So, I mean, that one's can be overcame depending on how you drive, as long as you're familiar with the truck. The third line, however, where I was up on the rock edge, which, mind you, I was driving that quite slow because rolling there was about a 7-foot drop, just sheer drop off. I mean, I was standing just outside the frame in case the truck did roll, but I didn't really want to. I was doing my best to not roll it off that drop off. You can kind of tell in the video there's a drop off, but it was at least 7 foot. The truck was above my head when I was driving that line, which is partially why it took me a few seconds to get the camera readjusted and panned over to that other angle. Is because I had put the controller down and then work up here above my head to get the camera turned and reframe the shot each time. But when we look at that, I took a good look at that because I had the most exaggerated side hill, which is where the sway bar on any rig that's got any chassis mass to it. I mean, a true comp rig that has a really lightweight chassis setup and a Lexan body, not going to have that problem. But anything that's, if you're running a hard body, especially a class 1 that's fully detailed, it's got an interior, a driver, some junk in the bed, you get all your scale points. You're working with a fair bit of chassis weight, which that hurts you on a side hill. So when looking at that, I looked at both the approach where I came up and I crested over, excuse me, and I took a couple snapshots from the video, and you'll notice here, here, one of these sides, I think it should be this side. I'm going to put a snapshot right up here that has the no sway bar is going to be on top, the with sway bar is going to be on the bottom, and you can look at from the rear how much more body roll there is without the sway bar and how much more droop there was in the axle, and that created having that body rolled over that much more meant the whole mass of the chassis was that much closer to actually rolling off of that hill. Having the sway bar attached meant that that compressing shock was offloading some of its pressure into the uncompressing shock and shifting some of that body mass back towards the hillside, and gave it a much more stable position with less roll in the body as it went over that breakover. And so that I think is huge. I mean, more articulation can be fun, but it's not always a great performance additive. And then from there, I looked at it from the other way, which I was glad I actually took that pan around shot where I walk around and look at the truck from the front. And again, I'll do no sway bar on top and sway bar on the bottom. If you look at the truck from the front, you can tell that, I mean, I did my best to to drive the line as close to identical as I could both times. But when you look at the truck from the front, you can see that both front tires are actually in contact with the rock face on the slope, and the body angle is very close to parallel with the axle angle on the slope. There's not a lot of body roll going on. Whereas when you look at it without the sway bar, there's a lot more body roll. It makes the side hill look a lot more exaggerated. But really what that's doing is it's got the CG of the body shifted over more, which means the truck is that much closer to rolling off of that edge. So ultimately, that having that sway bar on that particular scenario, especially with a side hill, you're dealing with some bumps and some dips, having that sway bar managed the chassis mass a whole lot better. The truck still managed to do that crossover line that I did there in line number 4 without issue both ways. As far as one better than the other, I think that would be just based on driver, whether or not you liked the way it drove it one way versus the other way, and being familiar with it. That wasn't a big deal. And then on line 1, where I'm transferring from the dirt onto that rock face, it looked like it struggled just a hair bit more without the sway bar. Getting onto the rock face, it kind of slipped and bobbled, but that also could have been a slight steering correction on my part, making a slight correction onto something that had a little bit less traction as it stepped up on there. So I won't rule that one way or the other, which was better. But without a doubt, that steep side hill in line number 3, it's clearly evident that the sway bar makes an impact on how stable this truck is on a side hill. And that's going to be true for any rig that's got a heavier chassis mass than something that's super lightweight. The lighter the weight is on the rig, the less body roll issue you have, because you don't have as much mass to actually be shifting around. But that's my recap on sway bar versus no sway bar. Currently, the sway bar is still disconnected on this because I haven't had a chance to reconnect it, but I will be reconnecting the sway bar. Being able to hit that side hill is key. Side hills are one of the biggest things that kill a lot of people in competitions, is being able to effectively handle and manage side hill conditions. And if you can handle those conditions, you greatly improve your chance of your truck working well and performing well, just all the way around. But as you can see, the sway bar is still zip tied up right here. All I gotta do is snip these zip ties. It'll drop the links back down, 2 bolts, and they're back. The sway bar's reattached, and we'll be doing that. But yeah, so having as much body roll as it has, I can body roll the back enough that it almost, even on flat, I can make it to where it just barely, I can get it to unload the front by compressing the back corner. And if I have the sway bar connected, that won't happen. It'll manage that a lot more. Granted, one thing that I could do that would also help manage that, as you can see on this truck, I've got a fairly aggressive shock angle. It's probably around a 35-degree shock angle, 35 degrees off vertical. And part of that was to be able to run a shock that had a reasonable amount of travel without having to cut holes in my bed floor for shock hoops. So I don't have any shock hoops. A vertical shock that is straight up is gonna work a little bit better at managing body roll than an angled shock is like this. So that's the other thing you can really do to help mitigate the body roll is that shock setup. Having them in an angle does reduce the the stiffness characteristics of the shock. So I mean, yes, there's other ways to mitigate it without a sway bar, but like I said, I mean, I really didn't want to cut holes in my bed floor. I mean, I've got a bunch of little tiny holes in there from different stuff having been attached over the years. Uh, so, and that's a pretty junky, beat up bed that's been around. But when I eventually, I'd like to do a new Hilux body for this chassis that'll be all nice and clean and built once, built once to actually accommodate this truck and be the way I really want it without having to change it multiple times or adding things and taking things away. Because I think I finally found the setup that I really like for this truck. Again, this sway bar kit, I mean, I didn't really modify anything. I didn't put it together exactly how they said to put it together because it wasn't meant for this chassis. But I found this sway bar kit on Amazon. It was like 15 bucks. I'll put a link down in the description for you to check out if you want to check it out. $15 to get it, mess with it, see if it makes your truck work better or not work better. Is not a huge investment. It's not like buying a much more expensive part to maybe not work. You may have to adjust and change things a little bit to work for your application. But again, at $15, it's a really low budget experiment to find out if it'll make your truck work better. And if you've got a heavy rig, I highly recommend checking it out. It might be something worthwhile. So again, I'll put a link to this part down in the description. They market it for a Wraith. I believe they market it for a Wraith and a Bomber is what the Amazon listing says it's for. I don't have a Wraith or a Bomber, so I can't tell you how the fit or function is on either one of those. But on a TF2 with a little bit of creativity on how you set up the spacers and getting the links adjusted right and using a pre-existing hole. The torsion bar here is actually in a pre-existing hole on a TF2 chassis. I didn't have to modify the chassis at all to put that in there. I think I moved the fuel cell into a slightly different spot so that everything would line up right. But I mean, you can see that I didn't drill any new holes or anything for that to actually go in there. It's maybe took 15 minutes, 20 minutes to figure out the geometry of how to put that together so that it was in a good spot and just all bolted in with the parts that it came with. Actually, I take that back. I changed out, it comes with a countersunk screw right here that fits into the aluminum piece. If the aluminum piece is put on, if you take this aluminum arm, sway bar arm, and you flip it over, it's got some recesses on the other side and it's got some countersinks. And that's the intended way for it to be installed with the tie rods on the outside. That's how they show it. But that doesn't work with this application. So I had to turn around. And for that reason, I replaced the countersunk screw with a button head because of the way I put this together and a nylock on the outside just to secure it. But there you have it. I for $15, if you have body roll or torque twist issues, pick up this sway bar kit, play around with it for 15 bucks, figure out how to put it in your truck and see if a sway bar is going to make your truck work better. I know it's something that I'm actually really happy I played with on this truck, and I will probably put one on a TF2 that you can't see because it's right up here above the Bronco, just out of the frame is my wife's TF2. That's a similar setup to this. I'll probably put a sway bar on hers for the same exact reason is it made this truck work better, and that's a very similar truck, so why not make that one better, right? All right, so that's a wrap on sway bar versus no sway bar for this application. Ultimately, you got to try it on yours to find out if it's something that's going to work for you. I think it works better for me and I like it. Be sure to hit that like button down below. Please subscribe. Don't forget, we are working on that 1K giveaway truck. I didn't get a live stream in today because of some family that showed up. Unexpected, but always great visiting with family. We'll try and get a live stream in next weekend, but there might be some conflicts with that as well. The following weekend is 4th of July. So obviously we're not going to be doing a live stream on the 4th of July, but we'll see. I'll see if I can get something going for at least getting a video up for that weekend as well. But after 4th of July, which is going to be the 11th, I think it's the Sunday of the 11th. We will be working on the 1K giveaway truck, and all we need to do is get the channel up to 1,000 subscribers, and then that truck's going to be given away. The body is in hand, so more new parts are in hand. So there's lots to do on that truck. I'm excited to keep that build going, and I really hope that sometime in the relatively near future, not too soon because I need to get it built, but sometime in the relatively near future, we'll be able to give that away to someone who's going to enjoy it. I know that if I were to receive it, and I don't necessarily want to give it away, but I know I'm going to because it's a catch 22, but it's going to be a great truck. And yeah, so that's a wrap. We'll see you on the next one.